Did Walter White manipulate you too? Because while Jesse was being gaslit, Skylar was being vilified, and entire communities were being quietly destroyed. Something far more subtle was happening off screen. The audience was cheering for it. That's the part nobody wants to admit. Somehow, the man who poisoned a child, orchestrated murders, detonated a nursing home, and emotionally dismembered every person who ever loved him, still walked away with millions of fans proudly shouting, "He did nothing wrong." And that didn't happen by accident. Walter didn't just manipulate characters, he manipulated perspective. He weaponized pity in Season 1, competence in Season 2, power in Season 3, and pure ego from there on out. But the frightening part? It worked. Not on the people in his life, on the people watching him. The same audience that instantly judged Skylar for saying no fell in love with the man who made saying no impossible. The same fans who forgave Walt for murder condemned Jesse for grief. And the same viewers who claimed they'd never fall for a monster spent 5 seasons defending one. So ask yourself, if Walter White can manipulate a DEA agent, a cartel, a partner, a city, what makes you so sure he didn't manipulate you? Let's break it open. The curious moral economy of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul seems to depend on a paradox the audience proudly refuses to acknowledge. The shows were never about heroism, yet viewers insist on knighting villains and crucifying anyone who dares to stand in their path. Walter White, high priest of weaponized ego, somehow became a folk hero. Saul Goodman, patron saint of sleaze, became an unlikely martyr for the underestimated. And Skylar White, whose greatest crime was refusing to applaud the reign of a burgeoning cartel monarch, became public enemy number 1. The franchise's most enduring trick was not merely turning meek men monstrous. It was convincing millions that the monstrosity was somehow admirable. Consider first the persistent fantasy that Saul Goodman pursued Walter White out of entrepreneurial instinct alone. The mythology imagines a grinning opportunist who smelled blue meth from 40 miles out and thought, "Delicious. I'll take 2 seasons of profit, please." But the more compelling, if slightly humiliating, explanation is that Saul was drawn to Walt precisely because he was underestimated. Jimmy McGill spent a lifetime being dismissed as a clown in ill-fitting suits, forever the younger brother, forever the nuisance, forever a child handed a lecture instead of respect. It stands to reason that when Mike Ehrmantraut shrugged off a mysterious Heisenberg as small potatoes, Jimmy's antennae twitched. A fellow underdog, stuffed into a box too small for his ambitions? That, for Jimmy, was practically a love letter. The man took pity on anyone crushed under institutional boots. One minor misdemeanor cost a young woman a prestigious job opportunity, and Jimmy went to war on her behalf. He couldn't resist a kindred spirit, especially one who happened to print money in powdered form. Once Saul entered the meth business vortex, subtlety evaporated. His ambition became almost charming in its bluntness. He popped into Walter White's workplace like a discount genie offering morally bankrupt wishes, badgering him to return to production, thrusting partnership proposals at him like a desperate salesman with rent due tomorrow. Subtlety was never Saul's strong suit. He treated the drug trade like a franchise opportunity. He asked Walt and Jesse how much meth they could whip up per week before he had even confirmed whether either could survive a full work shift without being shot. Such was Saul's magic. A 2-dimensional cartoon of greed and slippery ethics, convinced that any evil could be repackaged as client service. And yet even Gus Fring, the industry's resident minimalist henchman of death, eventually recognized that Heisenberg wasn't small potatoes at all. Gus, high arbiter of unimpeachable standards, could not resist the purity or the mind producing it. Gail Bedecker worshipped Walt with embarrassing enthusiasm, and one suspects Gus was not immune to that gravitational pull. Walt did not merely become indispensable, he became irresistible. Whether by chemistry or charisma, the man could make kings bow and acolytes swoon. Of course, the myth-making thrives on the idea that Walt is a misunderstood anti-hero. The audience does love a villain who pretends he's a saint, particularly one who presents himself as a family man with a modest goal and a reasonable motive. Apparently, even manufacturing industrial quantities of deadly narcotics becomes palatable when paired with a khakis and polo shirt aesthetic. Viewers identify with the irritation of a man who feels the world owes him more, and many seize any excuse to proclaim Skylar White the show's true menace. After all, it is infinitely easier to resent the woman saying "stop" than the man poisoning children, orchestrating murders, and detonating nursing homes. The writing was so superb that even as Walt's sins piled up like bodies in a cartel mass grave, a portion of the audience insisted he did nothing wrong. To them, Jane was simply a bad influence deserving her fate. Walt's manipulation of Jesse was tough love. Skylar's resistance was ungratefulness. The plane crash was not merely unrelated, but apparently not traumatic at all. The capacity for selective blindness became its own character arc, except it belonged not to anyone on screen, but to the viewers themselves. Walter White manipulated characters and audience with equal proficiency. The real tragedy was not how easily Jesse or Skylar believed him, but how eagerly the world beyond the fourth wall did. Few performances captured this dual deception more brilliantly than the scene in which Jesse confronts Walt, convinced he poisoned Brock. Bryan Cranston, not privy to the truth during filming, played the scene with genuine incredulity, because he genuinely believed the character innocent. The result was a lie so convincing that it became almost unfair. Viewers were not watching Walter White deceive Jesse, but Cranston embodying sincerity. Every other Walt lie carried tells, a stutter, a twitch, an overeager explanation, so flimsy even his teenage son could unravel them. Total pump malfunction, indeed. But here, the performance transcended the character, creating a moment so believable, it retroactively made Walt seem competent at deception. The audience was manipulated not by Heisenberg, but by Cranston. As viewers rewatch the series with companions new to the story, the transformation in perception is predictable and oddly satisfying. Many begin as Walt apologists, sympathetic to his plight, indulgent toward his excuses, and by season 5, they sit aghast at his shameless deceit, unable to defend him any longer. The spell eventually breaks. Walt's greatest trick is convincing the world he's doing it all for them, when in truth, he is doing it all for himself. That the audience had to learn this slowly only proves how masterful the writing truly was. Walt's selfishness becomes grotesquely clear in his professional jealousy. When Jesse brews a nearly perfect batch of meth, one that could secure his independence, Walt responds not with paternal pride, but with petulance. His little prodigy dared demonstrate competence without permission. For a man who claimed to be out, he behaved like a child watching his sibling play with his favorite toy. The transformation from meek teacher to tyrannical emperor had long since completed. The ego now ruled without constraint. Some argue Walt always harbored that darkness. The moment he refused Gretchen and Elliot's money, the mask slipped. The claim that he cooked for his family evaporated in real time. Pride, entitlement, resentment, these were the ingredients more intoxicating than the meth itself. The cancer diagnosis merely granted him license. Walt's appetite for domination became absolute. Jesse became a pawn to be manipulated at will, emotionally, psychologically, professionally. Grief? Walt reframed it. Happiness? Walt undercut it. Autonomy? Walt confiscated it. Jesse became an extension of Walt's ambitions, a vessel to be filled or emptied, depending on what the king required. Skylar fared no better. Walt engineered a household narrative in which she played the villain, her sanity questioned, her motherhood maligned, all to maintain his grip on the illusion of a normal life. Walt sacrificed marriages, careers, friends, children, colleagues, bystanders, and entire communities to feed the beast of his ego. Every rationalization began with nobility and ended in destruction. Of course, this was not mere accident. Walt was a genius who had never experienced meaningful power. His life as a chemistry teacher was a string of humiliations and unrealized potential. Once he tasted mastery in the meth world, he became intoxicated by more than profits. He became addicted to authority. He was alive, finally, and he refused to surrender that feeling. Mike Ehrmantraut summarized the entire man in one blistering sentence. Walt's pride and ego infected every decision, turning the empire into a bonfire. Yet even Walt's late-stage atrocities invite debate over how much he changed. Season 1 Walt agonized over killing Crazy 8, constructing a pro-con list like an anxious graduate student. Season 5 Walt would have executed him before lunch and still made it to family dinner on time. But the truth is that this morality was always conditional. Walt ultimately killed Crazy 8, revealing that his reluctance stemmed not from principle, but from hesitation. The potential for violence lived in him all along. It merely needed purpose. By contrast, Jimmy McGill possessed lines he would not cross, lines that defined him even at his lowest. When his sandpiper scam threatened to isolate an elderly woman from her friends, he abandoned the plan despite the financial fallout. When confronted with direct violence, he recoiled, haunted by trauma rather than energized by it. He had no appetite for bloodshed. His greatest moral failures stemmed from cowardice, not sadism. Even in the depths of Saul Goodman's neon depravity, there remained a kernel of conscience flickering behind the suits and bravado. Walt would have watched a child die without blinking. In fact, he did. Jimmy, on the other hand, suffered deeply when he witnessed Howard's murder. Jimmy's misdeeds harmed reputations, swindled pockets, ruined careers, but never spilled blood by his own hand. Walt's misdeeds left a body count. The fundamental difference becomes stark when examining motive. Jimmy sought shortcuts to prosperity. He was allergic to hard work and enamored with the thrill of beating a rigged system. He wanted comfort, luxury, and respect, without the drudgery that usually earns them. Walt wanted domination. He was consumed by the need to prove himself superior, to punish the world for failing to recognize his brilliance. Jimmy never wanted anyone to kneel. Walt wanted everyone to. Even their relationships differ. Jimmy loved Kim Wexler with a tragic, spiraling devotion. Saul Goodman emerged as a coping mechanism, a neon shield built around heartbreak. Walt's love for Jesse was complicated, perhaps genuine at moments, but often smothered by narcissism. Saving Jesse became an optional side quest when convenient, an obstacle when not. Walt's admission near the end, "I did it for me," was the only honest thing he ever said. Jesse was family when Walt wanted ownership. He was disposable when Walt wanted freedom. The question of whether Saul is worse than Walt occasionally arises, usually from those intoxicated by cleverness and blind to consequences. Saul's misdeeds were numerous: enabling criminality, turning blind eyes, orchestrating ethical contortions that would make a snake dizzy. But he was not a killer. He merely kept company with them. His evil was passive, opportunistic, tinged with embarrassment. Walt's evil was active, voracious, built on detonators and ricin vials. If Walt is the devil, Saul is the middle manager who files the paperwork. The comparison becomes almost comedic when contrasting their compatibility with Jesse Pinkman. Saul would happily go go-karting just to maintain peace. Walt would rather be shot than bruise his own dignity through such frivolity. Saul thrives in chaos. Walt sulks in it like a martyr denied applause. Still, the moral ledger is not a contest of who is the worst. The entire world of Breaking Bad is populated by flawed humans, with Flynn and Holly standing as the only truly innocent bystanders. Even Gus Fring, the immaculate butcher of the Southwest, lived by rules more coherent than Walt's. But the debate persists. Who is the better character? On complexity alone, Jimmy McGill wins by an Albuquerque mile. His arc spans decades, built on tragedy, humiliation, ambition, self-sabotage, and love. Walt's arc, while iconic, is almost algebraic in comparison. A straight line from bitterness to tyranny, clean and devastating, but ultimately predictable. Jimmy's descent is knotty, ambiguous, framed by questions that the show never fully answers. Did Chuck create the monster he feared, or merely reveal one that already existed? Did Jimmy corrupt Kim, or simply unlock a part of her she'd buried? Did Jimmy ever truly disappear into Saul, or did Saul merely flourish inside a man who no longer wished to feel? Walt was brilliant, but not complex. Jimmy was complex, but not brilliant. Walt broke bad with an excuse. Jimmy broke bad with 1,000 tiny rationalizations and a storm of self-doubt. Walt died with a final flourish of clarity. Jimmy lived long enough to face who he became. As for whether Walt could have gotten away with it, one must admire the optimism. Walt's downfall was not a matter of evidence, but inevitability. Even without the fateful copy of Leaves of Grass, Hank Schrader was circling him like a bloodhound. Pride would have undone Walt eventually. He would have bragged, gloated, or merely survived one drink too many before confessing his greatness to the wrong person. Walt was too smart to be caught, but too arrogant to stay hidden. His ego was radioactive. Containment was never an option. Even without Hank, Jesse would have become Walt's final reckoning. Their partnership was a chemical reaction with a single possible outcome: combustion. Jesse was guilt-ridden, perceptive, and increasingly aware of Walt's moral void. If Walt had not collapsed under the weight of his own hubris, Jesse would have brought him down through righteous fury. Walt built an empire on unstable ground: fear, manipulation, and half-truths. Eventually, something had to crack. The idea that Walt could have quietly reigned longer than Gus Fring ignores the inconvenient truth that Gus possessed discipline. Walt possessed fireworks. Gus lived humbly within his monstrousness. Walt demanded applause for his. The quiet life of a Shadow King was never within Walt's grasp. He did not merely want to win, he wanted the world to know he had won. The tragedy is that Walt could have survived if he had exercised even the most basic restraint. But restraint was never his virtue. He could have run a small, quiet operation for years. He could have taken Gretchen and Elliot's help. He could have remained alive, employed, and loved. But Walt believed he deserved more, and so he built a kingdom destined to crumble under the weight of his own ego. Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul endure because they understand the uncomfortable truth about human nature. Some people crave wealth, some crave respect, some crave power, but the dangerous ones crave validation. Walt wanted to be seen, Saul wanted to be valued, and in chasing those desires, they destroyed everything around them. One died triumphant in his own twisted fantasy. The other lived long enough to reclaim his name. Neither man was innocent. One became a monster. The other became a tragedy. And the audience, ever eager to pick favorites among devils, continues to debate which one to root for. proving once again that in the world of Albuquerque morality, the line between admiration and horror has always been a matter of perspective.